entire podcast off of falling into the shitter and getting flushed down the drain.
I hear you. All right, now we're recording.
All right.
So we're
Good morning,
recording.
Benjamin.
So Michael, welcome. What's up? I'm glad we're finally doing this. This is great.
It's been a while. It's been I don't want to say a long time coming, but it's about time.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, this probably started around mid-April, early May 2019, not 2019, 2021.
2020.
No, 2021.
Oh my God! It's only been 9 months.
Yeah.
Holy cow!
But let me tell you, a lot can happen in 9 months for sure. And we've been learning a lot about digital assets, NFTs, economics, how they all relate together, social media, various things. So we wanted to put this thing together as far as, kind of keep track of what we're learning, teach each other stuff. There's stuff that you're more interested in or that fits you. There's stuff that I'm a little bit more interested in or that fits me. So I think that this will be really fun. Who would you like to go first? And by the way, I don't think it should just be like presentation style. I mean, like I might ask you questions, you should ask me questions, whatever the hell it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Especially since I'm driving right now.
I love it.
So me being in the financial services industry, I'm naturally more drawn towards financial stuff. Anything that's financial is kind of interesting to me. So naturally, decentralized finance kind of grabs my attention. It's been something that I've been wanting to learn more about, and little bits and pieces here I am, but it seems like it's just a giant puzzle, and I've got lots of puzzle pieces that have cool pictures, but they're not really putting themselves together. So I'm going to try to put the puzzle piece of DeFi together and try to figure that out a little bit at a time. There's things like nodes. I don't know what that means, but I know that I need them or want them.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, there's yield farming. I know a little bit about that. I dabbled in it a little bit, but not nearly enough. And then they're saying, who needs banks anymore? You can go bankless, right? Which maybe you can. I don't know, but there's something that occurred to me is that all this yield that you're getting when you stake your coin, you stake whatever currency you have, you're lending it to somebody else. Well, what are they doing with it? Are they taking it and actually buying a home with it, buying a car with it, like borrowing how? And when you borrow, you're borrowing against your own assets. So it's a collateralized backed loan. Do they have non-collateralized backed loans, like a mortgage or a car loan or something, based off of, obviously not your credit, but based off of what? Because if they don't, then you still need a bank for that type of a loan. So I don't know. I'd like to wrap my head around the entire DeFi scene and see how it can benefit me and others, and kind of take it from there.
Awesome.
Thoughts?
There's a lot. I really think it's super interesting. There's a lot there. DeFi is something that you hear about all the time. Yeah, I'm really excited to learn about it, especially because you're talking about staking in one in one kind of realm, which is in the financial realm. One of the things that I've been looking at is the technology and how staking is relevant. Over there, where you don't necessarily make a yield, you certainly can make money. That's one of the things that I kind of looked into today. Yeah. So.
All right.
Yeah. So what I thought to do, I was just going to share you some of the stuff that I learned recently, and kind of see how that hits. So, in the past, we've spoken about really what blockchain is, how it works, why it's important, and really, what it does. I don't know if we'll get to that again somewhere in this whole thing, but in general, the idea of blockchain technology, the concept behind it, that sounded really weird. The goal, maybe not the goal, but within distributed ledger technology, what essentially we're doing is we're not trusting just one group, person, or entity, organization to have all of the data, to house all of the transactions, to validate them, and then to just kind of tell us what happened. But we have a number of people who all have different copies of what the true ledger of transactions should be, and they're constantly verifying them. So, and that's something that I wanted to talk about a little bit. So, anytime you're going to do basically anything on the blockchain, you need to take a transaction, which is essentially an information. It doesn't necessarily have to be me sending you money, or me sending you ETH, or me sending you an NFT. It could be me sending you an email. It could be me proving to you that I have a certain credential, things like that. Anytime I want to do something like that on the blockchain, I need to present a transaction to the validators of that blockchain, and then they have to validate that transaction and add it to a block and append it to the blockchain. Nobody's going to do that for free, right? So in the traditional sense, we've spoken about how you present the transaction in Bitcoin. They either do a bunch of mathematical calculations, and whoever comes up with the answer soonest, quickest, wins, and then they get all of the fees that were associated, plus they get some Bitcoin from the protocol. And so one of the good things there is that it is very, very difficult to crack, meaning to attack it, to put in false transactions. One of the bad parts is that we've heard the environmental situations. Every transaction, every block that gets added to the blockchain, there's going to be one validator who comes up with the correct answer and hence successfully validates the blockchain. And all the other validators who did all of that computational work using all of that energy, they're not going to get anything. So all of that energy, right? If you think about how much power is used to validate one block, for every additional validator, entity who wants to get on Bitcoin and make some money, it increases the amount of work that is globally used and produced and done to validate that transaction. So from that perspective, it's not really efficient. So Ethereum comes along with a different protocol. They have proof of stake. Now with proof of stake, what you do is you stake a certain amount of ETH. You essentially lock it up, and the percentage of ETH that you stake over the percentage of all ETH that is currently staked for this method, or for this reason, for this protocol validation, that is the percentage of transactions that will be presented to you to validate. So, separate from Bitcoin or proof of work, you're not coming up with a calculation and then presenting it to everybody else to verify, but you are given a transaction, given a block to validate, and you're able to validate it by the fact that you had a certain amount staked. And in that way, only one computer, one group, one entity, one node is really doing the calculations to process a transaction. That's all stuff that we've done in the past. Certainly, if there were questions about it, I can answer them, and probably there's some interesting things that I could learn even more there, which we might get to in the future. But, one of the things that's obvious if you think about it, and one of the things that I was thinking about that brought me to where I am now is, what about things that you have to do a lot of transaction for? Like games, or, anything else where you're, like email maybe, right? Anything where you're constantly sending information back and forth. The idea that every time you do that, you'd have to pay a fee makes it a little bit, not worth it, right? Every time, let's say you opened up your, Nintendo Switch or PlayStation and you wanted to play a game, and then you did a couple moves and you had to pay gas fees, that wouldn't work. So one of the things that they've done is that they've created what are called layer 2 solutions. And essentially, the goal of these layer 2 solutions is to minimize the amount of times that we have to add information to the blockchain. Every time we're adding information to the blockchain, we have to pay a bunch of validators to do that. So the fewer times that we can do that, the better. There are two main ways in which currently these layer 2, they're called roll-ups, are being implemented, being done. And the reason they're called roll-ups is because in both cases, we're not doing transaction by transaction like we're doing on the regular layer 1 system, right? If I send you ETH and you send me a VFriend, each one of those transactions is independently validated and added to a block and appended to the blockchain. Whereas in a layer 2 solution, all of the transactions are rolled up in certain instances and are added to the blockchain. Now, does that make sense?
So you're saying with layer 2, they roll them up and just kind of stack them all into layer 2?
Essentially,
you got to dumb it down for me a little bit.
Okay, so let's say you are Fortnite, right? So every time somebody plays, you don't want to add transactions to the blockchain. And since you're the creator of Fortnite, right? So if you win something, I don't need to verify with anybody else outside of the Fortnite, computer system, right? That you won that particular game, challenge, whatever, right? It's within the system. So what happens in a roll-up is that, or in a layer 2 solution, is that at certain intervals, various transactions are grouped together by the creator, by the originator, validator, and then added to the blockchain all en masse. So instead of transaction by transaction and asking the validators to validate them, they're presenting many transactions all at once, and B, they're actually not asking them to be validated usually right at that instance because they're claiming validation.
So essentially, the layer 1 guys are still getting paid the same amount because they're doing the same amount of work because the layer 2 guys have already stacked all of those transactions together for the layer 1 guy.
So in some ways that's not exactly true, but it's a good question. The reason it's not exactly true, and this is actually something for me to understand how the protocol understands the difference. But so I mentioned that there were two different roll-up ways. The two different ways are called, I think, the optimistic rollups or ZK rollups. So, for example,
I've heard ZK rollups. I have no idea what that means, though.
You're gonna learn very, very shortly. So first I'll go to optimistic rollups. Now, with every blockchain, there is a different, what's called a consensus protocol, which means a way that all of the people maintaining the blockchain can gain consensus that the transaction you're attempting to add is correct and not erroneous, nefarious, and you're trying to steal people's money, right? So the way that they do that, again, in blockchain is by calculating an answer to a mathematical problem, really, finding a solution, and then publishing that solution out to all of the other validators. The other validators take that solution, put it in, say, yeah, that works, and hence, once you get 51% of the validators to confirm, you now have consensus, and that can be added to the blockchain. So in a layer 2 solution, oftentimes you're not actually asking for consensus at all. You're sometimes asking for the reverse. So in an optimistic roll-up, what you do is you add the transactions to the blockchain without any validation at all. And what you do is you provide what is called a fraud proof. And what that does is it allows instead of blocking transactions from getting onto the blockchain or verifying them as a prerequisite to get onto the blockchain, what's happening is we're actually keeping two copies of the blockchain. One is the original one, and one is the different, what are called states of the roll-up that is meant to be added. And when they present these groups of transactions, various other validators have the ability, have the option to present claims claiming that the transactions that are proposed to be added are fraudulent. When those things happen, it goes to a certain mediation kind of, which is all done by smart contracts, like a management contract, which adjudicates whether or not they're fraud transactions or not. If they are, it needs to actually go back to a prior, what's called a state of the side of the roll up, aka, right, if you're thinking about a game, all of the different, I guess, moves or states or things that people won, right? And if you wanted to add that you found some really cool sword, and somebody comes and says, wait a second, that's not true, they need the ability within the roll up to roll back to a previous state, and then once everybody is done with their fraud challenges, then it gets added to the blockchain. Does that make sense?
That sounds a lot. I mean, I guess, but that sounds like it's a lot. Did power just go out?
Yes, it did in my whole house.
Huh.
So I'm about to lose this conversation. Oh, hey,
right.
Wait, no. It didn't go out of my whole house. It just went out downstairs, but it's still on upstairs because that's why the internet is still on. So hold on, let me work on this thing.
I'm assuming you can edit that part out. Hey, lights on.
Edit it out. I'm keeping it in, baby. It's the first episode.
Right.
We're doing it all.
Then we definitely should have started at 7:30 this morning, and so the whole world could have seen the shit show.
I hear you.
Was ensuing in both of our worlds at that moment.
I hear you.
Hashtag have kids, they said. So it sounds like the optimistic roll up is, or could be potential to be less secure.
So that's interesting. I would actually, I mean, not necessarily. And the reason I'm saying that is because things don't actually get added to the blockchain for a significant period of time. The actual main problem with an optimistic roll-up is actually liquidity, right? Because if you try to do some transaction, if I try to send you some money or whatever it happens to be, and it takes 7 days for them to add it to the main blockchain because they were allowing for various fraud challenges, you can't get at your money or your digital asset, whatever it happens to be. So with optimistic, usually it's not that it's less secure necessarily, but because actually with an optimistic roll-up, one person could make a challenge and undo a fraudulent transaction. Whereas in the consensus protocol, you need consensus, right? You need 51% to be able to do something. In a fraud protocol with an optimistic roll-up, if one person presents a challenge, it goes into the management contract and it's adjudicated. So one person has just as much power, or one entity, one computer, whatever, has just as much power as many. So
that's 51%. The other one.
Well, correct. Either 51% of computing power, or which would be in Bitcoin's case, or 51% of the staked Ethereum in a proof of stake case. At this point, both of which are basically logistically impossible, right? It's impossible to own 51% of all the computing power that is working on Bitcoin, and it's basically impossible to have 51% of all the ETH staked to validate transactions. That would be, I don't know, billions or trillions of dollars, I suppose. I guess billions. Yeah. So does that make sense?
No. I'm sorry, dude. You are way too smart for me, or at least I'm just not there yet.
Yeah.
I listened to what you were saying, and I know that there's two different ones. There's the ZK roll-up, which I've heard of, and then there's the consensus roll-up, which I haven't, and I understand the difference.
No, it's optimistic.
But again, this goes back to This goes back to the whole puzzle piece thing that I was talking about in the beginning, where there's pieces of puzzle all over the place, and I'm like, all right, I've seen that piece, I've seen that piece, I've seen that piece. I know what those pieces of the puzzle look like, but I don't really know how they go together. So I think that's a big part of what I'm missing.
So this might help. If you're transacting exclusively on layer one, which in general you and I have, buying NFTs, trading crypto, whatever it is, you're adding transactions directly onto the bottom of the chain in blocks.
I get that part.
In a roll-up, in the optimistic roll-up that I mentioned, essentially what you're doing is you're keeping two copies. You're keeping the normal blockchain, and you're keeping all the rolled up transactions in various states, and you're keeping it on the side, believing that it's true, acting as if it's true within that organization, right? So for example, within the game, you might act as if you had those things, even though you can't necessarily pull things out, right? Within the game, I can still have that sword or whatever, but if I tried to go to a layer one solution and, like, for example, take that NFT and sell it to somebody, I would have that liquidity issue until those transactions were actually included on the main chain. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So essentially you're just keeping two copies, and then once you finally agreed that side copy is true and nobody has any, nobody has basically told on you or submitted any fraud claims, then it gets added on.
Okay.
Zero knowledge, ZK rollups, that's what Immutable X does.
There's where it comes from. ZK, zero knowledge.
Zero knowledge, that's correct.
So many freaking acronyms in the world, really.
So in a ZK rollup, when you it's still the same thing. You have a side group organization with a bunch of transactions that it is bringing together and putting together. And in a zero knowledge rollup, the transactions get added automatically, and instead of presenting hold on, let me look at my notes.
We're supposed to take notes?
I mean, I did. Oh, goodness.
You're better at school than me.
Oh, but the notes that I took are not even here. Goodness gracious, but this is all good.
At least you took the notes. At least you took notes.
Well, but
this proves to you that you're better at school than me.
I mean, I don't know what better or worse means, or what it does, or what it has to do with anything.
Got better grades.
I'm all out on tests as a general statement. So essentially, the way I understand the ZK rollups is instead of having a fraud proof, right, where you bring this fraud proof and then other people have to challenge it, here you add things directly through this validity proof. Essentially, the way I understand it now is that only the person with a validity proof can add transactions through that validity proof onto the blockchain associated with with these side entities or transactions. So, for example, if I own Fortnite again, right? So a validity proof would essentially be the proof that only the Fortnite administrators are sending the transactions to be added and not you or I, right? So that's the validity proof. They're not providing they're not validating any transactions. They're providing the proof that they are the valid people, the valid entities with the rights to be able to add these transactions. But all the transactions are done outside. So, for example, in book games, right, with any kind of game, Fortnite, whatever, I don't even know if Fortnite's on the blockchain. I'll look that up. But right, so the way that makes sense is that the entity is controlling everything as far as the rules of the game, who owns things, how it works, all that stuff, and then saying to the blockchain, yes, I am book games. Here are our transactions, and now they are saved in a blockchain which is distributed everywhere, so that no one necessarily has to, you know, maintain all of the information. Now here, it is, you might say that that is somewhat centralized, and to some degree that it is, right? In that the host organization...
It has to be.
Right. But yes, exactly. Within certain communities, the information relevant exclusively to that community has to be kept within that community. It doesn't, right? So, but the information about ownership as exists and is saved and maintained on the blockchain, and is validated by that game. So it has the ability, it's kind of like the best of both worlds, meaning it has the ability to limit who can actually save the information or present the information to the people who actually have authority, but it doesn't keep the information held exclusively within them. It brings it and it saves it on the blockchain so that everybody can have total transparency as to what that is. And I haven't looked into this, but let's say hypothetically, for some like nefarious reason, I think it does exist. I'd have to look this up. You wanted to like cheat in Fortnite, and Fortnite was with you or something like that, right? So they still provided the validity proof, and some nefarious transaction got in. I'm pretty sure that there's a way to roll those back, because you haven't necessarily, like, all of the blocks themselves are, I'm actually not sure how you do that. So I'm going to get back to you.
All right.
You know, I got to this originally I got to this through book games. I also started thinking about it. Have you ever heard of sharding?
I heard this term for the first time, I don't know, maybe a day or two ago. And obviously it took me by surprise at first, but then I realized, there's a D in there. So it's still funny because we're 5.
So essentially, sharding, and let me explain why these all things come together, and I want to explain it because it'll come up. Sharding essentially is the process by which you take a big, huge database and you break it up into smaller logical pieces so that you don't need to process everything at all at one time, right? Like, for example, imagine you wanted to like look up a word in a book and you just had to do it with your eyes, and here's the book, right? One bizarre word. But what if I said to you like, oh, it's in the 3rd chapter? Okay, well now I know only look in the 3rd chapter, right? So sharding is the process by which you take a database and either cut it up what's called like vertically, meaning you have the same columns, right? This is the first name column, this is the last name column, this is the address column, this is the cell phone number column, but you're going to have part of it and I'm going to have part of it. Maybe you'll have A through M and I'll have N through Z, so that when questions come in, some of them will be routed to me and some of them will be routed to you, right? Which will lower the computational time, because instead of searching the whole thing, they'll only search part of it. And there's also sharding, which is not vertically, but horizontally, which means, let's say, you take the information and you cluster it in other groupings. For example, instead of having one table that has Mike Lloyd and his birthday and a lot of like biometric information, right? Your birthday, your height, your weight, your eye color, your blood type, stuff like that. And then other fields next to that has your social security number and your address and stuff like that. And then other one has like your phone number and your email and your work phone number and, stuff like that. And then other will have like information about your driving record. So what they might do is they might cut that up vertically, horizontally, actually, and say biometric information is over here about Mike, and financial information or contact information is over here, and other information is over here. The goal always is really to make the computations faster and easier and better, right? So whether or not we are sharding, taking the database and cutting it up so that the work is less, because we're not working on the entire database, right? In Ethereum, or not just Ethereum, in any consensus protocol, part of what you're doing is you're verifying that everybody has the same copy. So if we're all looking at the entire copy of everything, it's very, very big. But if I'm responsible for this shard, it's much smaller, and all of us can equally manage that shard. And then the
Does that
question
make it
is,
more efficient?
the goal is to be more, yes, for sure. The goal is to be more efficient and faster and cheaper by not having to do all of the work. And really the same thing conceptually is done by layer 2, just obviously in a very different implementation, right? The whole goal is how can we process transactions, maintain the same level of security and accountability while also not paying an arm and a leg and having transactions take a long time either to A, finalize, or B, fully get onto the blockchain and be out of some kind of fraud protocol or whatever it is. So these are, some of the different ways technologically that that people are trying to do that. Again, either through sharding, cutting up a database and giving different sections to different groups, or through a layer 2 solution, having all the transactions within the community and then adding it at certain intervals.
All right.
So that's the deal.
Puzzle.
So that's the deal. Yeah. For next time, I want to understand. I really want to understand the ZK rollups a little bit more, and I want to really understand what happens when they get out of whack. And what I mean by that is, when you're sharding, the goal is to have all of the groups kind of the same size, right? Not maybe exactly, but if I have 1 billion transactions and I cut it into 2 groups, one with 1 transaction and one with 999 million, right? Then it doesn't matter. They should kind of be somewhat equal. But as time goes on, they can again become unequal. I don't really know how that works as far as efficiency and scalability. So I'm curious about that. And, in particular, I'm curious about it because Ethereum is great, but, all of these things, the thing that I think the most about is 10 years, everybody, I don't know, I'm saying too much. I believe that myself and a lot of other people have thought about an idea of maybe having just one main blockchain that kind of wins. I don't really think that that's going to be true. I don't think it's going to be possible just because as time goes on, they're just going to get too freaking long. You know what I mean? Keeping all the transactions of everything that's done throughout history over 5 years, 10 years, how are you going to be able to maintain that realistically? I'm not really sure. But I think it'll be interesting, and I think that they'll be really
Wasn't that like space? The blockchain just continues on and on?
Yeah, no, it does. But what I'm saying is anytime it gets too big, it gets logistically not feasible to actually work with and maintain, right?
Well, they say that everything that's ever been posted on the internet is still available because it's on the internet, right? So
yeah.
The internet, how big is the internet? We've managed to keep all that stuff on the internet. The internet.
But not really. And when I say not really, what I mean by that is, when you make a Google search, you're not actually searching the internet. What you're doing is you're searching through what Google has already identified and categorized for you for that search and whatever. But what I'm saying...
All right, so then you could also go to, what are the other search engines? Yahoo, DuckDuckGo.
But my point is that if you were... They've already made it efficient for you, right? They've already made it so that they've optimized their database so that when you search for example, recipes, right? Mm-hmm. So they either, they do various things. They either... and they don't do this, but hypothetically, right? They'll either take that and say, oh, it begins with R, let's only look through the R websites. Again, this is very simplistic, but to understand, right? Or they're going to say recipes like food, we're only going to look through the food things or something else. The more data that you're working with without the ability to differentiate it makes it slower. It's always going to make it slower. And it's also going to make it more expensive because it's going to take more time and energy to be able to do the work for you, which means it's going to be more expensive. So, you know, so as people get more, you know, as just transactions become more, it has to be that there has to be other ways for it to, you know, to scale and be efficient. You know, like if you think about it, I was thinking roughly 58% of the world is online, like has some web access. And about 3% of the world's population has owned or traded or whatever, some kind of cryptocurrency. So that means that if everybody with internet access got cryptocurrency, then there would be 20 times the number of people already. 20 times the number of transactions, which obviously would be way more because just time will make it more transactions. You already see, like, that's completely not feasible, right? I mean, like, just even trying to figure out the right place to send like, you know, just even maintain that, for example, verify that the address that you wanted to send it to is even a valid address probably will take a long time when there's 30 bashmillion addresses.
That's a great word.
You know what I mean? So I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but these are all the kinds of things that are, you know, trying to figure those things out and trying to make them more efficient and better. Yeah, so we'll see. It's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah, it definitely is. The one thing that the bankless guys said last night, well, not last night, I was listening to the podcast last night, is that they rebranded, meaning, I guess, everybody, whoever uses the term Web3, has kind of rebranded crypto, right? Because crypto kind of makes it seem like, ooh, it's spooky, it's cryptic, it's, you know, they, again, have rebranded crypto as Web3. I like that better. Because it kind of takes the mystique away from it. It's now just really technical rather than being technical and scary.
I hear
I like
you.
it.
I mean, we know that the word crypto comes from the word cryptograph, which is, I mean, you know, just like it doesn't come from the word like Tales from the Crypt.
Okay.
But
well, I mean, that's what I think everybody probably refers to or references it to. Tales from the Crypt.
But interestingly, where does the term, now I'm looking it up right live, where does the term cryptograph come from? Or maybe cryptogram? I don't know. Whatever. Cryptography, etymology. I have to, I didn't even look up, I didn't even look up the right word. I typed in graphology, so it's not even the right thing. Etymology of cryptography. The word traces back to the Greek word kryptos, meaning hidden, or to write. So hidden words. Cryptography means hidden words. Okay, so I guess it does mean crypt. Okay, that's scary then. I guess, I don't know.
That kind of sticks with the whole anonymous part of it.
Yeah,
right?
It's interesting. Okay, fine.
Blockchain's anonymous.
So, cryptograph. Okay, interesting. I don't know.
I'm going to learn some stuff about DeFi for next time.
I love it.
Not sure what yet, because like I said, there's lots of puzzle pieces, and I don't really know how they fit together, but I'm going to pick one and build off of it, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. I'm going to send you this video.
Okay.
All right, dude. I will talk to you later.
Sounds good. All right, man. See
Be
ya.
good.